The kindest man on television had a secret locked away in his desk drawer for decades. For over 30 years, Fred Rogers worked in his office, but never opened his drawers in front of anyone. The people around him knew, but nobody dared to ask what was inside. Until one day, after he was gone, someone finally turned that key. What they found wasn't what anyone expected. It was not a scandal or something twisted. What they discovered would shake you to your core and make you question everything you thought you knew about kindness. But what could a man like Fred Rogers have kept hidden for so long? And why did it change everything when they finally found it? The man behind the sweater. Everyone knew Fred Rogers as the gentleman in a sweater who invited children into different kind of world. He had a familiar smile and a very soothing voice. To millions of people, he was a comforting presence. But behind that calm was a secret that nobody knew of, one that wasn't revealed until after his passing. Before unveiling the secret, let's meet the man that became a legend. Fred Rogers grew up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. The house his family owned was large and comfortable. His father worked in the steel industry and had built a home with luxuries that drew the neighborhood's attention. Despite that abundance, the boy who would become Mr. Rogers spent his early years mostly alone. Even though the estate had room to run and trees to climb, it still felt like a landscape of empty hallways. His father was frequently absent because of long hours at the plant. Adults and servants tended the house, and yet a young Fred longed for conversation and company. That longing lodged inside him and later shaped how he spoke to children who felt alone. Unfortunately, illness visited him quite early during the Great Depression, when so many lives were fragile, and he was struck with both measles and scarlet fever. For 47 days, the boy lay feverish and weak. At some points, his temperature shot up astronomically above 104 degrees, and it seemed as if the world tilted as hallucinations blurred the line between the room in which he lay and the stories he would later tell children. His mother didn't leave his side. She stayed with him through those long, cold nights. She also did something unusual. She taught him to play melodies on the black keys of a piano because his fingers were too weak to reach every note. For him, each black key became a way to say a feeling. And just like that, music in that room became his first friend and the instrument of his gradual recovery. Fred Rogers had trouble with coordination. As a toddler, he could not even tie his shoes or use a fork. Doctors diagnosed severe developmental dyspraxia and suggested grim options. One practitioner urged institutionalization. His parents refused to accept that bleak prognosis and hired a therapist named Margaret Thompson. She used puppets to spark movement. By turning therapy into play, she coaxed the rigidity from his hands. 6 months into treatment, his coordination improved dramatically. He still relied on Velcro shoes until he was 12, but he never forgot how the gentle imagination of puppetry had helped him heal. As if he wasn't going through enough already, another trauma visited him again when he was small. It happened when a train derailed near the family home and dozens of people died. He watched the wreck from his window, and like many children forced to make sense quickly of an adult world, he asked blunt questions. Why do people get hurt when all they are doing is trying to go somewhere? His parents tried to explain it away, but Rogers learned the truth from a newspaper. That question he asked his parents would later return in many forms throughout his work. He wanted to give children a framework for sorrow that did not feel sensational, but that neither dodged the truth. By the age of 5, he invented an audience of stuffed animals and gave them voices. He performed puppet shows alone in the attic. Those puppets carried the themes that later populated his television scripts. His mother was so moved when she discovered one of his small productions that she commissioned a real puppet theater, complete with velvet curtains and stage lights for her son. He named a favorite puppet David the Dreamer. And he carried that tenderness forward into a career devoted to the small dramas of childhood. Faith entered his life through family and intimate conversation. Baptized at 6, he received handmade felt Bible stories from his grandmother. She did not offer tidy answers when he asked difficult questions. When young Fred asked why God would allow children to suffer, she replied that perhaps God invites wonder. Those weekly talks imprinted a different notion of faith that allowed questions and honored doubt. They taught him that belief did not require certainty, and that wonder could be part of trust. This approach would show up in the gentle humility of his television conversations, where he often said he did not have all the answers, but that he cared deeply. School was a whole different level of difficulty socially. Bullying followed him because of a high voice and an awkward stature. Students taunted him, and teachers did little to nothing to stop them. Once shoved into a locker in the cafeteria, he began to retreat and sought help from a therapist. He was this close to changing schools, but he stayed and learned something essential. Resilience is not a sudden trait. It is a slow accumulation of small recoveries. During a summer interrupted by hay fever, he composed a complex piece for string quartet. Classmates mocked the music when it was first performed, but he persisted. That composition remains in archives as proof that his interior life was rich and industrious, even when peers responded with ridicule. Relations at home were complicated. His father, James, had survived world-shaking events and carried his own unspoken weight. He wanted his son to be strong and practical and to take his place in the family business. Fred felt the pressure and, in private, chronicled the emotional distance. In a diary entry, he recorded how many days it had been since his father asked how he felt. When given a stark choice by his father between art and the mill, he unhesitatingly chose art. When his brother arrived, the emotions of childhood intensified. He resented the new baby and acted out in ways that terrified even his parents. For 6 weeks, he refused to speak, and his parents were forced to consult psychologists. Young Rogers carried guilt for his dark impulses. He felt his parents' love drifting away from him. That hurt him badly, and later admitted that he sometimes wanted his brother to somehow disappear so that parental affection would return to him. That admission of a dark side and the subsequent feeling of remorse didn't leave him. It fueled his lifetime of teaching children that unwanted feelings do not make someone a bad person. During civil defense drills, he was only a young man, placed on rooftop lookout duty. But there, he experienced a terror that rooted itself in his imagination. From experience, he lived in perpetual fear of enemy planes and was quick to imagine destruction. Anyone who knew him then knew that the panic was real, even when the danger turned out to be friendly aircraft. It was from that fear that Rogers made a rule. He would not include violence in the work he made for children. That commitment distinguished his programs and gave them a quality rare on television then and now. He wanted to create spaces where children could be safe, even inside stories that acknowledged fear. He studied music at Rollins College beginning in the late 1940s and graduated with honors. While in college, he expanded his scope, joined choirs, and composed scores. However, just like in high school, life at college also revealed vulnerabilities. A girlfriend mocked an early speech impediment, and he was forced to train his breath in unusual ways. He even went so far as to practice speaking underwater to smooth his rhythms and steady his voice. That slow, deliberate cadence that everyone knew was not an affectation. Instead, it was a technique born out of the work he did to be clear and comforting for the smallest listener. But how did a lonely boy who whispered to puppets and learned feelings on the Black Keys become the calm, courageous neighbor millions welcomed into their homes? The making of Mr. Rogers. While in music, television called out to him, and he answered. He spent his early years working behind the camera in New York. He found the industry sordid in places and could not stomach routines that seemed to treat children as a laughing audience for grown-up cruelty. He walked away after a few weeks. It was that refusal to compromise his sense of decency that would later become a hallmark of his career. He believed that children deserved respect and that entertainment need not come at the expense of dignity. In Pittsburgh, a small opportunity presented itself, and he took it. The Children's Corner began as a shoestring operation with one yellow legal pad as a planning tool and a handful of puppets. Everything was improvised. The yellow trolley for the show did not exist, so Fred Rogers crafted one out of scraps, spending painstaking hours building a tiny device with tweezers and glue that would ride across a tiny track. It cost $18 and became an anchor for countless stories. A sock handed to him by a station manager became the basis for a character, and he would voice every puppet live, improvising dialogue during broadcasts. The effort was exhausting and exacting. He did not simply perform the puppets, he voiced them, composed songs, ran to the organ and back, and managed the live unpredictability of a small studio. Once he collapsed on the studio floor after an episode about sharing. The strain showed at home. He and Joanne had been married since their mid-20s, and they weathered long nights and fierce demands. In a rare moment of anger, he smashed a puppet. That outburst terrified him later, and he used the memory to teach children about handling anger. He turned private failure into a public lesson. As the show grew, he collected letters and objects from viewers. He built a hidden room in the King Friday Castle set, and a trolley factory where he kept thousands of gifts and drawings sent by children. He cataloged them and replied to each child personally. That diligence was part of his practice. He treated every note as a call for attention and answered with the same care he brought to writing scripts. To him, a child who took the time to write deserved a response that honored their courage. Critics sometimes dismissed his pace and his methods. Reviews called him boring or too slow. Ratings rarely matched the numbers of commercial programming. Yet, when public broadcasting funding was threatened, he walked before a Senate committee with a song and a modest account of his salary, and made a case for the value of steady attention. His testimony and his refusal to sensationalize saved support for public programming. But he did not change his tempo. He trusted that children needed time to think and to feel. He refused to let commerce swallow the territory between a child and a screen. He turned down a large licensing deal that would have turned his characters into toys, cereals, and theme park attractions. To him, the space between the television set and a child was sacred, and he would not sell it. That line cost him money, but preserved the integrity of his work and kept the characters from being commodified. Personal challenges continued. He wrote hundreds of scripts over 3 decades. He developed a precise manner of speaking, now sometimes called Fredish. He worked long hours and trained his body in private, not to be seen as a counterpoint to the softness of his image. He swam miles before dawn and did weight training and push-ups. He kept those facts private because he did not want them to distract from the message. The discipline he applied to body and voice was invisible to viewers, yet foundational to his presence. Sometimes, his programs did more than comfort. They asked hard questions about suicide, war, grief, and anger. Stations and networks resisted. Parents worried that giving children too much language might encourage acting out. He disagreed. He believed that not providing words for feeling was more dangerous than naming pain. He insisted on episodes that treated sorrow with a language that children could hold and that adults could accept without panic. So what did the man who taught millions about honesty keep hidden for himself? The locked drawer. Fred Rogers may have been a hero to everyone who crossed paths with him, but he was also human. He carried scars he rarely spoke of. Instead, he took to writing in a manuscript about severe acne during his teenage years and about the shame he felt. He described how he resorted to using makeup to cover scars and choosing television over an in-person ministry, because he imagined his face might distract people from hearing what he had to say. But instead of putting it out, publishers took the view that the level of vulnerability was too raw at the time and declined to print his manuscript. So he placed those pages in a drawer. That decision to hide them was not a retreat. It was a boundary he set about when and how to expose his private wounds. Later in his life, severe stomach pain arrived, but he responded with the same steadiness he had asked children to practice. He filmed episodes while undergoing treatment and sometimes had to use padding or sit between takes. He let illness enter storylines so children could learn words for stomach aches and fear. His final tapings were difficult and brave. He recorded a goodbye to the trolley that read like a ritual. Saying farewell to a small red vehicle carried the weight of saying goodbye to the ordinary rhythms of life. He accepted endings as real things children could meet without panic. He maintained a practice of prayer and personal attention that many did not know. Each morning, he spent 2 hours praying and kept lists of hundreds of names of children who had written to the show. He prayed for these children by name and treated each letter as a sacred trust. That discipline shows how seriously he took the responsibility of being a neighbor to thousands. Every year on his birthday, Rogers wrote a letter to God. He questioned whether he was doing enough, whether his work really mattered. He kept over 30 of those letters, along with journals of viewer mail, that made him cry. Later, the public began to gather the artifacts of a life that had quietly shaped an entire approach to childhood. Sweaters, puppets, scripts, and handwritten notes found homes in archives and museums. A documentary and exhibitions renewed interest in his method. Educators and therapists adapted his techniques into classroom practices and therapeutic tools. Daniel Tiger, an animated spin-off of characters and themes he created, extended his work into new generations. Schools used songs to teach coping strategies, and families found new language to speak about feelings. The locked drawer was less a repository of secrets and more a record of a man who counted his life in questions and small acts. The letters he wrote to God did not show a man at war with himself. They showed a person who held doubt as part of devotion and who kept a private accounting of hope and worry. When those pages became known, they softened the myth of a man without fear. They revealed someone who asked whether his labor mattered and who continued anyway. The rejected manuscript and the closed drawer remind us that generosity can be accompanied by private trial, and that courage sometimes looks like quiet confession rather than dramatic revelation. The influence of those private pages spreads into classrooms and counseling rooms. Therapists draw on how he named feelings and how he made room for pauses. Educators adopt his patient pacing as a classroom technique, and counselors use his scripts to help children practice saying difficult words. Daniel Tiger carries this ethic forward. The animated songs and sequences are not merely entertainment. They are carefully designed scaffolds for emotional learning. Parents report that the simple melodies and repeated phrases help children name emotions and practice coping steps in moments of stress. That legacy shows how a practice of attention can become a tool for development. His wife, Joanne Rogers, took upon herself the role of a custodian. She kept the locked drawer safe and honored his wish for privacy. That trust is itself a lesson about how people hold one another. She became the steward of artifacts and of tone. The archive built around his life is not a shrine to an idea. It is a workshop for anyone who wants to learn how attention transforms a single life into a public good. The artifacts are tactile reminders that intimacy does not require spectacle and that generosity is a discipline. When the letters reached the public, they did not indict him. They brought out the human in him. Some say he was the perfect example of a human. The letters invited readers to consider that the work of kindness often carries private measurement and private fear. Those pages complicate a familiar hero and remind us that we are permitted to doubt as we remain committed. That combination of doubt and devotion is what keeps his work alive. But even the man who helped millions face their fears has to face his own. Passing and memorial. After Rogers' retirement in 2001, he didn't just fade away. He remained busy working with FCI, studying religion and spirituality, making public appearances, traveling and working on a children's media center named after him at St. Vincent College in his hometown of Latrobe, with Archibald Douglas Nowicki, the college's chancellor. Remember the stomach issue? By the summer of 2002, his chronic stomach pain became even worse, enough for him to see a doctor about it, and in October of that same year, he was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He kind of delayed his treatment until after he served as Grand Marshal of the 2003 Rose Parade with Art Linkletter and Bill Cosby in January. On January 6th, Rogers underwent stomach surgery. But only less than 2 months after that, he passed on at his Pittsburgh home on February 27, 2003, at the age of 74, with his wife of 50 years right by his side. He was in a comatose state shortly before his death, and during that time, he received the last rites of the Catholic Church. Fred's passing caused a considerable stir. The following day, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette covered it on the front page and dedicated an entire section to his death and impact. The newspaper also reported that by noon, internet traffic was massive, full of appreciative pieces from parents, viewers, producers, and writers. No doubt, Fred Rogers' passing was widely lamented. Most metropolitan newspapers in the United States ran his obituary on their front pages, and some, just like the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, dedicated entire sections to coverage of his passing. They also reported that the ratings for their coverage were 3 times higher than their normal ratings, a valid proof of Fred's legacy. That's not all. The same evening of his passing, Nightline on ABC broadcast a rerun of a recent interview with Rogers. The program also got the highest ratings of the day, beating the February average ratings of The Late Show with David Letterman and The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. On March 4th, the U.S. House of Representatives unanimously passed a resolution honoring Rogers, sponsored by Representative Mike Doyle from Pennsylvania. On the 1st of March 2003, a private funeral was held for Rogers in Unity Chapel, which was restored by Rogers' father at Unity Cemetery in Latrobe. About 80 relatives, co-workers, and close friends attended the service, which was planned in great secrecy so that those closest to him could grieve in private. Reverend John McCall, pastor of the Rogers family's church, 6th Presbyterian Church in Squirrel Hill, gave the homily. Reverend William Barker, a retired Presbyterian minister who was a close friend of Mr. Rogers and the voice of Mr. Platypus on his show, read Rogers' favorite Bible passages. Rogers was interred at Unity Cemetery in his hometown of Latrobe, Pennsylvania, in a mausoleum owned by his mother's family. A public memorial was held at Heinz Hall in Pittsburgh. According to the Post-Gazette, the event was attended by 2,700 people. The memorial was broadcast several times on Pittsburgh television stations and websites throughout the day. Why did Rogers really keep the letters hidden? And are there still celebrities like him today? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video, showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.